I'm Joanna Pierre-Neves, your host, and this is Exhibitionistas. I'm an independent writer and curator with a wide-ranging 2-decade career in contemporary art, from commercial galleries to art fairs, from research to curating, from Lisbon to London, through Paris. But when I'm asked what I do outside the art world, the inevitable reaction is, oh, I don't know anything about contemporary art. Ouch. So call it a midlife crisis, call it arrogance, but I gave myself the task of trying to fill that gap with co-host conversation episodes centered around a genuine exchange of thoughts, feelings, and precious context around solo exhibitions, interviews, and special episodes based on a particular topic to keep you alert and on your toes. If you want to read further into some of the topics discussed in the episodes and more, you can also find me on Substack under my name, Joanna Pierre-Neves. Hi there. A few notes on the episode you're about to listen to. So I'm interviewing Sarah Quang Sang because, to my knowledge, she has the only commercial gallery dedicated to showcasing and promoting art produced by women and queer artists in the UK. So the gallery is called SLQS and is based or is located in Shoreditch in London. So when I mention the artist Bex Wade and the acquisition of their work by the V&A, so Bex Wade had an exhibition right before the current one at SLQS, I say that Bex Wade was the first non-binary artist in the collection, which is not correct. So when you get to that point of the introduction, remember that Bex Wade is a trans non-binary artist. And in the words of Zorian Clayton, another of Bex's photographs purchased with Art Fund support has recently gone on display at Young V&A in Bethnal Green. This is believed to be the first time an out trans artist's work has gone on display in a permanent gallery at the V&A. End of quote. So this is to celebrate, and Zorian Clayton was the curator responsible for this acquisition. So it is important to set the record straight and also to be joyful and to celebrate this state of affairs at the V&A and in the permanent gallery. But it's also important, I think, to acknowledge the current climate of erasure of trans rights and the narrowing of notions of gender. And so I thought of reading an excerpt of a text Wade wrote for the summer edition of Art Review and available in its entirety there. So, as Sarah mentions eloquently in the interview, we are indeed living at a time where trans and queer communities are being failed and where gender is being reduced on a legislative level. So, reading a part of Bex Wade's text is to put it out there. It's my voice, but it's their experience. So stick around for the interview with Sarah and her fascinating trajectory, and then to listen to Bex Wade's words after the interview. Without further ado, let's do this, and thank you for being here. So far, the highest ranking episodes of the first season and the last season of Exhibitionistas are Philip Guston, Gerhard Hichter, followed by Marina Abramovich, Daido Murayama, Tanya Kovacs, Yoko Ono, Judy Chicago, and Aria Dean. I would have put my money on Abramovich, Yoko Ono, and Judy Chicago being the most listened to, especially because they've had so much press coverage, and two of them are two big stars. But Oh, and also, I'm a female host. So I thought, more females listen to females. But no, and you'll be surprised to know that the majority of listeners to the Abramovich episode are male. So I can tell you exactly the percentage. It's 62.5% and 37.5% are female, and there are no non-binary listeners. So this is really interesting because in the 8 ones, so if you don't look at ranking, there's 5 women and 3 men. But what's interesting as well is in the 12 episodes, we have more women than men. So that kind of reflects the program as well. And of course, this is anecdotal. We all know that to have real statistical data, you need far more examples and you need far more numbers. But it's still interesting. It's just one season. It's just one experience. But it's interesting to know that Abramovich coming in 3rd place is really telling, because she's a second generation, she's in the second generation of feminism, which is a very typical generation of saying, as she has said, that had she had children, she wouldn't have gotten where she did. Of course, she tracked back. She kind of course corrected on that one. But it's true that if you think back and look at the artists who made it from that generation, a lot of them had to kind of, what the 3rd generation of feminists have sort of read into their attitude, they kind of went against notions of the female gender. So, for example, being mums was a question. Counterexample, Mary Kelly, that we may talk about. So the reason why I'm mentioning these analytic results and these very questionable readings, of course, I'm very conscious of that, is because today I have a special guest. So this is an interview episode, a new star in the constellation of London galleries, Sarah Quang Sang, who has established a gallery in Shoreditch last year called SLQS, and which champions female, queer or non-binary artists. I was intrigued as soon as the gallery popped up on my Exhibitionistas Instagram feed. So the reason why my curiosity was piqued further is precisely because Sarah doesn't have your usual career path of art history, culture management, working at Sotheby's or Christie's, then working in commercial galleries, and eventually opening your own gallery, which, by the way, not many people take that step. So, dear listeners who are students, build your own career path. There's a lot of stuff out there to do. You can be an art advisor, you can work for funding in big institutions or small ones, non-profits, you can do lots of things. And Sarah did precisely that. So I decided to invite her because I thought, okay, I'm really interested. I want to know how exactly she arrived at Shoreditch. Who is this person? I thought. And, I won't know who she is at the end of the episode, but dear listener, I think we're going to really love listening to what she has to say. So Sarah is Franco-Vietnamese. She had a multicultural upbringing. She lived in many places, amongst which Cameroon, UK, France. She studied acting in Paris, and then she came to the UK, to Manchester, where she studied international business, finance, and economics. And then she moved to Dubai, where she lived for 8 years, and she earned a living in real estate while taking a keen interest in experimental theatre, of all things. She was co-founder of one of the city's first experimental theatre companies. But in her mid-30s, with a 2-year-old child, she returned to London for an MA in performance at Goldsmiths in 2016. She then became co-director of the charity Procreate Project, which promotes artist mothers, and through which she curated the first Mother Art Prize and Oxytocin Birthing the World exhibition program. And I'm quoting her here. She said, "Becoming a mother changed everything. My schedule, my mobility, my decisions." Speaking with the art newspaper, Le Quang Sang said that starting the gallery brings together the two parallel strands of her career, a career as an artist and in business. The gallery was launched on International Women's Day. Interviewed by Melanie Gerlis for the Financial Times, she described her venture as a long game. So far, the gallery has showcased the work of Bex Wade, a non-binary artist whose work has been acquired by the V&A, which turned them into the first non-binary artist in the collection, Diana Gravina, Polly Penrose, Ingrid Berton-Moine, Mia Wilkinson, Kate Williams, and currently, so the current exhibition, Vietnamese artists Vicky Do, Ho Dang Clerget, and Duong Thai or Tui Nguyen. I apologize for the mispronunciation of the names, surely. So, Sarah, welcome to the podcast. I'm really, really happy to have this conversation with you.
Thank you so much. What a power introduction you've given me. I'm really flattered and really, really honored to be on your podcast. Thank you so much for inviting me.
It's a pleasure because I did go to the gallery. We had a sort of a meeting and we spoke for about an hour. And I just remember leaving the gallery and thinking, well, that was not enough to answer the question, who is this woman? Why? How did she come here? But it really, really kind of sparked even more interest. So I'm going to ask you the first question. So this is Exhibitionistas. I'm always interested in knowing, where was your first connection to visual arts? How did it start? Was it in the family? Was it later in life?
I must have been 8, and my parents took me to the Dali Museum in Girona, in Figueres. And so, Salvador Dali, basically, there was this municipal theatre that was destroyed during the Civic War, the Spanish Civil War, and he renovated the theatre, but the whole place is a work of art, and it's a surrealist work of art. And I went back actually a few years ago because I was just so struck by this memory. There is a car outside where you have to feed with people inside, and you have to feed it a coin. And when the coin drops, rain starts raining inside the car. And I just remember being totally mesmerized by this impossibility of raining inside. And how performative, I think, my interest in art has always been through performance. But I think, the taste for experimental also came from when I was 9, my family moved to West Africa. We moved to Gabon for 3 years, and then we moved to Cameroon. And I was immersed, again, thanks to my mother. She was a cultural journalist, and she was fascinated and a huge supporter of the local art scene. So she really introduced me to, I think what I remember is really being immersed in music, by key African musicians, like Manu Dibango, Salif Keita, Angelique Didjo from Benin. This is also very much part of my childhood. So quite a classical training, but then also something very different, being immersed into the cultural richness of West Africa was also very pivotal in my understanding of the arts.
Is there an exhibition that you can think of when you finally came to visual art that sort of made the cut for you, that kind of really showed you something new or made you decide that visual art was really where you wanted to go? Because you also have a practice as an artist, so there probably was a shift there. I'm presuming it was an exhibition, but it might not have been.
It was my experience curating an exhibition with visual artists that really widened my perspective. I went back to study at Goldsmiths and I studied performance making. At the time I had a 2-year-old, and then in my second year I was also pregnant with my second child. And I was really looking for other artists who were mothers or carers. At the time, being a mother was a huge part of my identity. I think I probably felt that my identity was almost reduced to my mothering responsibilities. So there's a brilliant library, the Women's Art Library in Goldsmiths, and Althea, who runs the library, Althea Grinham, spoke to me about Procreate Project and Diana Gravina. She's the founder and director of this organization called Procreate Project, which is a non-profit space that really supports artists who are mothers and carers through several initiatives. And when I met her, she had the Mother House studios, which were artist studios with integrated childcare. She was piloting this new concept, but we also started working together on this symposium, which was Oxytocin, Birthing the World. But what really transitioned me from performances to the visual art is when she asked me to create the first Mother Art Prize. And that was really looking, we had an open call. It was on the theme of leftovers. What are your leftovers creatively in terms of your sexuality, in terms of your identity, when you are mothering? What is left unused? Can leftovers be used for your creativity? There was a winner as well, which was Mary Martin, who won for her film The Divide. So I think working and curating this exhibition with 22 artists that, except for Mary Martin's film, were very different to theatre, very, very different to performance. We had sculpture, drawing, photography, installations, mixed media installations. That really opened up for me a different world, because the theatre world is very separate, I guess, to the visual art world. Performance is striding in between, rejecting theatre. As I guess my experience was like, going to Goldsmiths for 2 years was like performance, live art is essentially rejecting some of the tropes of performance. It's not acted. It's very much a lived experience. And then creating this exhibition really widened even more my perspective into visual art.
Mm-mm-mm. And so in terms of your experience of being a mother and being at Goldsmiths, I'm really interested also if this experience has had an impact on how you see the art world as a professional structure. So like a set of unwritten rules and behaviors that are very much there, but that aren't spelled out as such, if I may say so. Like it's a life that is not very conducive to having a family. So did you think about that as well? And how does that entail then setting up a gallery? And in your gallery, do you think about those aspects?
Yes, totally. When I was at Goldsmiths, I used to live in Bethnal Green, and Goldsmiths was an hour away from, door to door, really. It took me an hour to get to New Cross. I had a 2-year-old child that was between a childminder, a nursery. I had a very different life to the students who were in my course. They were all living in South London. They were all hanging out after lectures. I was just running back and forth. I had a child that didn't sleep. I was waking up at 5 trying to catch up with some work. It was a very different experience.
That's taking me back to so many memories.
That we probably try to forget how difficult having young children is. I had access to 2 residencies. I did a weekend with the Live Art Development Agency, which was, I think, the first weekend I had spent without my child, where I could focus exclusively on thinking and sharing with other participants in the residency. And then later on, a few years ago, again, I had the opportunity to do a 5-day residency with UK New Artists in Lincoln. Again, being child-free, being able to think, because I found it was just really difficult to even think, or to even have time to think really clearly. But But, that's probably the maximum amount of time I could really go on a residency. I talk to other artists who work in the gallery who have caring responsibilities as well. You can't just disappear for 1 month. You don't potentially have the support system, and maybe also you don't want to. And then when I was thinking about opening the art gallery, I mean, yes, of course, I did think, maybe I could work in an art gallery for a while. But I didn't think that was possible. I didn't think, I want to have a life which is flexible. I want to be able to attend my children's sports day. And the 5 different Christmas events that were put on by the schools. From a personal level, I wanted to create an organization that can be flexible. I also wanted to set up a gallery that would discuss, problematic definitions of what is an emerging artist, what is a mid-career artist. Can we remove these definitions? I removed date of birth from my artist biographies. I don't think it's relevant. I don't think it's relevant if you've done X amount of exhibition by the time you're 30. Have you been in an institution? I think we need to really rethink these definitions and be more inclusive by acknowledging that people have got different career paths. And if you are, emerging or re-emerging, because you emerge in your 20s and then you got busy in your 30s, maybe you're back fully into your artistic practice in your 40s, you've got a life experience. But I'm also working with artists who are younger and who are asking themselves, what happens to my career if I have a family? Can I work with a gallery that will support this? And I think these are really important questions to think about and to have with collectors. I went to Milan for Mega Art Fair in April, and I was quite surprised by a lot of collectors asking me, how old is this artist? Because I want to support an emerging artist. And really, and I really had to be like, all right, hold on, let's stop. Let's discuss this. Let's have a conversation.
When you move to the market, as you say, people have really specific expectations of what an artistic career is. So what you're doing is very interesting. And now I'm interested in knowing how the collectors reacted to your spiel. How did they receive your information?
I think, you can plant seeds, but it will take time. It will take time to have fundamental shift in the market. It will take time, and I can't be doing this by myself. So I think it's also widening this conversation with galleries, institutions, all the players within the market, to really be able to create change. So, it's one conversation at a time.
I'm really curious as well, because when I saw your gallery and I saw, the very specific mission you gave it, I thought that's really courageous, because we're living in a very conservative time in the market. People are looking at painting a lot. We're really going back. It's like the author, this is in literature, Rachel Cusk, said, sometimes I look at the literature around me and what's being read and talked about, and it's as if modernism had never happened. And I sometimes think it's as if conceptualism has never happened at times, when I go to galleries, which great, everything's very patriarchal. All movements in the 20th century were very patriarchal, and I acknowledge that. But it is true that looking at painting only can be really conservative as well, and this probably not the solution either. So I'm really interested in knowing, why you chose to open a commercial gallery in the current climate.
So yes, I worked as an artist and I work with non-profits. That also allowed me to see how much funding was disappearing and was being removed, and how political funding is as well. So I think that was one of the reasons why I set up a commercial gallery. I decided to really specialize and really championing women and queer artists, because I mean, there is plenty of data and statistics that shows you the gender inequality in the market. You had, the Freelance Foundation that did several reports on the representation of women specifically in the UK. You had a book by Hetty Judah, which is on how to include, artists, parents, and others, which is also a key publication in giving you statistics as well. There needs to be more research for queer artists as well, and some of this research for women artists has been removed as well and have stopped, and that's worrying. That is worrying that we don't have, a lot of this research stopped in 2022, and actually we're in 2025, and we don't have necessarily up-to-date statistics. But it's very, very clear, there is more women than men entering art education. There is more men represented and being shown, and so earning as well a lot more. We're also in a political time where women and queer rights are being revoked. And in the commercial sector, there is not that many galleries that say we support women and queer artists. They might do it through their programming, but they don't say it. And I think it's important to be unapologetic about it and to say, this is what we're doing because it's needed.
Absolutely. My daughter just sent me on Instagram a post of a young woman saying that recently the police has been allowed to search women's medical history and home if they've had a miscarriage.
Right. I mean,
what does that mean? And I was also thinking about, lesbian couples who have children. There's two women in there, male artists who are parents and who want to parent fully, with dedication. Have you come across situations where there's different kinds of families or unconventional or non-traditional notions of family with children, and what difficulties do people face in those situations?
On the question of, non-heteronormative families, I think with, gender, the importance is not to make a decision on the behalf of someone else. I think what we have to do is to be open and to listen to different experiences. So I'm not here to be able to define who is a woman, who is queer. That's not my role. My role is not to define people. People have to define themselves. My role is to create a space that feels inclusive. I think my role is to create a space where if you don't fit the heteronormative or you're not cisgender, that you can still be, you can still feel safe and you can still feel like this is a space for you.
That takes me to my question about identity, which you've started talking about. So I don't know if you're familiar with this article that many people have been talking about, Dean Kissick's article, which was published in Harper's Bazaar, about the fact that identity politics are destroying art and are making us look and curate bad art in museums. I was wondering if you see any pitfalls in this question of identity when it comes to the market.
So you're talking about the Painted Protest, right? By the article by Dean Kissick that was
exactly.
Published.
Thank you for saying the title, which I forgot.
Yeah, by a few months ago. It's an interesting article because I think it's missing an important question. And I think it's missing the question of why are artists making work about identity? So it's only looking at it from a viewer's perspective, and from this particular, it's pretty much from Dean's perspective, really. But, it's obviously, it takes a lot of time for artists to make work. It's a huge amount of time and research and experimentation. So why are so many artists making work about identity? I think this is the question that we should be asking ourselves. We have an exhibition that includes Vicky Doe. It's called Only Your Name. And it's about the migration journey of the Vietnamese diaspora from Vietnam to Hong Kong and then to the UK. It's a very peculiar story because the Vietnamese diaspora, essentially the reason we have a Vietnamese diaspora here in the UK is because Hong Kong was a British colony. So that's very interesting to think about. I was talking to Vicky, she's based in Saigon, but she said something that interested me. She said, after this film, she didn't make work for 6 years because she didn't know what was important to her anymore. And I think, if an artist is going to make work, is going to dedicate so much time and effort into making work, it's because they think it's important. And there are so many, I think, this is the question we should be asking. So yes, okay, Dean is fed up with seeing so many work about identity, but it's obviously really important for this artist to be making work at that time. Often, I would say artists make work because it interests them on a micro level. So it might be based on a personal experience, but then often, artists will then widen their research onto a macro level. And so it is a reflection of society. And I think that in those times that we are now, where identities, are threatened, trans people are threatened, queer people are threatened, women's rights are threatened. I don't think identity, work necessarily about identity is going to die down. I think there will be more of it because maybe there will be less work about identity if it wasn't relevant anymore, But I also think it's interesting because in this article, he obviously talks about, the Venice Biennale last year on foreigners everywhere, which is very much a retrospective of artists that have been marginalized. This is a whole new canon of history of art, which I want to know about. I don't think necessarily, but it's interesting to think about this retrospective and to think about how we interpret the meaning of this artist now in our contemporary context, when maybe the artist at the time wasn't specifically making work about identity. We see it now as about identity, but maybe that was not the main goal, the main message. So the last exhibition we had was a solo exhibition of Bex Wade, who's a trans non-binary photographer who is based in the UK but has documented the queer community for 20 years. And we showed some of the earliest work, which was early 2010, queer nightlife photography. So you put it in the context of when this image were taken. This was on a personal level when Bex was finding out about their own queer identity, but also for the wider community. It was before same-sex marriage was legalized in the US. It was the beginning of the Obama years. And it felt like a really joyous time, a time of possibility, a time of change.
It feels like a lifetime ago.
Right.
Though.
So now you fast forward 15 years later, we have this exhibition, we have these incredible, joyous pictures, photographs on our wall. 3 of them, like as you mentioned in the introduction, were acquired by the V&A. So they are of historical significance, a reflection of a certain time. And, the show opened a week after, the devastating, Supreme Court announcement of what the legal definition of a woman is, which has been excluding, trans women and the trans community, and which was decided without discussion with the trans community, which was taking us back to a point we were talking about earlier, which is making decisions on behalf of others, And suddenly these images on the wall became really political. There was one particular image, which is called New York Nights, which was of a person. It was taken at a lesbian night. So a person, presumably, a woman urinating in a urinal. And, when Bex talks about making this image, they walked into the toilet, they were like, oh, sorry. The person was like, no, great, take a photo. And, the way Bex described it, it was spontaneous, it was joyous, it was performative, it was a collaboration. And, 15 years later, you look at it in a context where all the media was obsessed about who's going to be using which toilet. It almost became, there's a collector who acquired it, and you were asking me about the market and collectors. And, the collectors who acquired Beck's works, yes, are collectors that want to support a trans artist. There are obviously collectors who want to see queer images as part of the collection, want to include the queer gaze in their collection. And, the collector who bought this work said, this is the image of the year. There is no other image. And Art Review commissioned Bex to write an article about this work, which will be published soon. So I think there is, yes, why are artists making work? And how is it being viewed in the current context and defined as identity?
That's fascinating, because that particular definition of women, I was so taken aback by the fact that it didn't focus on the trans community as a whole, but it focused on trans women.
Mm.
And again, is always that stigmatization of femininity and the reduction of the notion of femininity. And I was writing the other day about something, notions of gender from the beginning of the century. And I was rereading this text where Freud was looking at his daughter and was thinking, women aren't inventors. Women didn't invent anything. They didn't have the minds for that. And then he kind of took it back, because Anna Freud was at the loom. And he thought to himself, okay, of course, they probably invented the loom because the pubic hair is hiding their desire for a penis. So this focus on the genitals is here culturally so much, such a critical thinker for our communities and for our society and for our culture. And at the same time, such terrifying writing about notions of gender. Mm. I was kind of thinking, so what can we do? So do you have any words to put out there in terms of institutions? I think the V&A is a great example.
When this acquisition took place with the V&A, they actually received some money from Art Fund to diversify their collection and to specifically include a trans artist. And I think that these parts of fundings are critical and necessary for institutions to be able to acquire work. We still need to do a lot of work into diversifying boards of institutions, so they reflect more, our society and also the artistic landscape. Who are the members of the artistic community more than the artistic landscape?
You mean the opinion makers, the people who have power in those, decisional power in those institutions? Yeah,
absolutely. I think in terms of decisional power, we need to have, obviously the curator Zorian Clayton, who was responsible for this acquisition for Bex Wade, is part of the queer and trans community. And so we need more diverse voices when it comes to institutions, not just, at the artist level, but at the curatorial level, but also at the managing level, and board members of institutions that have got huge soft powers. So we need diversity across the board. I think with, the state of the public funding at the moment, I think that private collectors have a huge role to play. And
well agreed on all. Yes, absolutely.
I mean, it's interesting. I was part of the London Gallery Weekend this weekend, which is great. It's an event, that invites 125 galleries to participate and to put on events all weekend. We had an artist walk through. We had a tour with Martin Clark at the gallery. It was a real moment of activation, but it was also a real moment of meeting institutions. So London Gallery Weekend, again, has got funding to be able to invite international curators to come to London. And so I met, international curators in countries where there is no public funding. So I know we complain about how much our public funding is decreasing, but actually there are countries that has no art council or that has no public funding at all. And there, patronage, private institutions, private collections have a big role in making sure that all artists are supported, making sure that all genders are supported, and trying to rebalance that, gender inequality which is in the market.
Can you unveil a little bit what you're thinking about in terms of the future of the program of the gallery?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we have a solo exhibition that's going to be in the autumn with Damaris Athene, who's actually the work that you can see behind me. Well, that's part of one of her series called Latent Space. And yes, I think that I'm really looking forward to Damaris because she's incredibly ambitious in her vision. And this is going to be her first solo exhibition in a commercial gallery. I've been following and I've been part of her journey for a long time. She was part of my first exhibition in a physical space on Conduit Street last June. And then I showed her at the Women Art Fair. I took her work in Mega, which was incredibly well received and all placed within private collections. So to be able to say, right, well, we've done all that journey and now, you've got this space to do a solo exhibition. I think it's great collaborative process. She creates incredible installation and sculptures made of fabric and glass, and her research goes incredibly in details and is about interspecies relationship, specifically in the underwater world, trying to make us think outside of bodies, trying to make us view our body materiality differently through intersection with other species, but also the digital. So I'm really excited about that. Again, I've got another solo show with Kate Williams, who was part of the first exhibition here in February. Again, an incredible, ambitious project. Kate creates large-scale fabric work, and she's going to create an installation in the gallery. I can't tell you much more because I want to keep it. It's so exciting. But yes, it's basically going to be, I guess, an immersive space where the gallery floors, ceilings, will be, she'll create a cocoon essentially. And she plays a lot with perspective. I showed her work in Mega in Milan, which was probably one of definitely the favorites of the fair, because she plays a lot with illusions and perspective, and she describes her works as delicious. She invites you to enter a delicious illusion world, which is exciting. And obviously, I'm also looking at art fairs in London and also internationally.
Are you thinking of representing artists? Are you going to work in a sort of a traditional model, or are you trying to reinvent the model a little bit?
No, I'm looking to represent artists. I mean, so far I am working with artists which is flexible in a way where, works are consigned, but if there are other opportunities for artists to show their work, opportunities are discussed. And essentially, I think that, if you're an artist entering the commercial art world, it's probably beneficial for you to be working with different galleries. It's beneficial for the galleries as well. So I'm also working with, collaborative models. I'm taking Diana Taylor, one of the artists who was exhibiting my first exhibition, to do a solo show in LA in July with another gallery which opened recently as well, called Don't Look Project. So it's also about, what opportunities I can find internationally, which is not a fair, which is a collaboration with other galleries. I do want to represent artists, and I will be representing artists either by the end of this year or the beginning of next year. But I think it's important to take my time, and for both me and the artist to test the relationships before engaging into representation. And that is through doing group exhibition or doing solo exhibition or art fairs together before fully committing to, representation.
I think that building a relationship with a gallery is a very, very important aspect of the work. It really is. And it sounds like you're really doing it slowly, steadily, and with lots of consideration and dedication. So that's really, something to appreciate. So thank you so much, Sarah, for your generosity. It was really fabulous to listen to you and to know more about your experience, to follow you and to keep on following you after the episode. So do you have any call outs that you want to leave out there for any of your projects? This is the moment. And then we'll just say goodbye.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. So we currently have an exhibition called Only Your Name, which I mentioned early on. It has 3 artists from Vietnamese descent, Vicky Do, Hoazon Clerget, and Dong Thun Nguyen. It's on until the 12th of July. So please come through. We open Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 12 till 6. Also open by appointment. Follow us on Instagram. So we'll be closed for August, but we will be opening an online screening room, which is curated by Florence also Fitzgerald, and which is going to be focusing on interspecies relationships, looking at work which are either documentation of performance or that include performativity. So Flo is curating a really exciting program which is going to be going on for 6 months, where each month an artist's film is featured and available online, which really is about extending the program outside the gallery walls. So yeah, we can also sign up to our newsletter to be able to get more information on that.
Amazing. I already did, and you should. So thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you for doing this with us. It was a great pleasure. And you out there, I hope you're doing very well. Thank you for listening. Sign up for our newsletter as well. Sign up for all newsletters. I mean, we put so much love into those. So do that as well for Exhibitionistas. And I hope you're having a great time. And I'll be with you in 2 weeks. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
All right. So as promised, I am going to read an excerpt of the text written by Bex Wade for Art Review for the current issue, summer 2025. I encourage you to get your hands on it so that you can read the whole text. So I am going to read the last part of the text a little bit further than the middle. So here goes. Bex Wade for Art Review. There's a difference between being visible and being witnessed, a distinction I return to often in my work. Documentary photography, at its most human, isn't just about observation. It's about responsibility. It doesn't just look. It listens. It stays. It becomes a kind of testimony, not shaped by spectacle, but by solidarity, by trust, and by the ethics of presence. Visibility may bring exposure, but exposure isn't empathy. To be visible is to be seen. To be witnessed is to be felt. I've often said visibility does not equal safety, and I believe that now more than ever. My photographs aren't always made as declarations for the outside world, even if they're sometimes received that way. They're often gestures inward. I photograph from within the queer and trans community as someone who shares the spaces, who has danced the nights, and who now marches the protests and prides. I carry their same fears. It's why I speak not of capturing moments, but of creating them together. Every image is built on trust, on shared understanding, on consent. And that consent is all-encompassing. It's at the heart of my work. Because I ask, whether someone is alone, in a crowd, or up a tree, as happened recently at a trans protest I was documenting for British Vogue. Our community is so often treated as if we don't deserve autonomy, in how we're acted towards, spoken about, or legislated upon. That truth was laid bare by the Supreme Court's ruling, which passed judgment on trans lives without hearing a single trans voice. It's a pattern. We are debated, defined, regulated, but rarely asked what we need, how we want to live, or how we seek to be protected. My work insists that trans and queer people have the right to decide how they are seen, whether they are seen at all. I've always thought of my photographs as a living archive. Not static records, but moments full of breath and contradiction. They say, we will not be legislated out of public life, nor erased from public memory. In moments like this, when the law fails us, when public discourse turns cold, art can become a shelter. Not one of retreat, but of resistance. A space where we write ourselves back into history, where we care for each other in public, where we refuse the terms we've been given. But still there is joy, still there is that image in the nightclub bathroom, still there are people protesting from treetops. Still there is the dance floor. Still we persist, not despite our complexity, but because of it. I don't take photos to prove we exist. I take them because we do. These were the words of Bex Wade for Art Review. Bex Wade is a photographer based in the UK, and it has been my honor to share their words with you. Thank you so much for being here, for allowing me to be in your eardrums. And I hope that in the following 2 weeks until the next episode, you will be out there in the world, fabulous, having fun, having respect for yourself and for others, and being great. Thank you so much to those who made this episode possible. Shout out to Vita Heb, who assisted me in this episode, particularly in the edition. So if you're on Spotify or YouTube, and if you want to have a look at the images and the works we talk about, you can always go back and revisit the video. You can go to our Instagram account, where we also have images of the works we mention. You can also follow SLQS on Instagram. You can follow us, Exhibitionistas_podcasts. So that's it. This is the end of the episode. Take care. Have a good one. Exhibitionistas is an indie podcast with its perks and its productive challenges. But I'm very thankful to be in your eardrums or somewhere in your screens. Don't forget to support independent content. Give us a nice rating, subscribe to the newsletter, and if you can, click on the show's notes or go to our website and buy us a latte. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting us. Thank you for listening. Have a good one.